Section 19 of Hearth and Home, collected poems and stories by various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Little Street Pilot by C.C. Jessey. Little Joe, that was his name, or at least it was the only name by which he was generally known, although he himself, when asked, declared that his real and lawful and only true and proper cognomen was Joseph Warrington, for Joe was very voluble, be it known. Such a name as this, however, was much too long and unwieldy for the glib tongues of his fellow newsboys, and hence it will readily be seen how easily it came to be shortened to brief and euphonious Little Joe. As to the adjective prefix little, that came naturally to the mind the moment one saw the boy. He was a little fellow, so little, in fact, that to have seen him with his bundle of papers under his arm would have caused you to smile. The bundle usually seemed to be larger than the boy by half. Little Joe was a newsboy, and a few years ago he was to be found daily at the junction of Broadway, Ann Street, and Park Row, or in that immediate vicinity, calling out the names of his papers and stock as loudly as the loudest. Joe was bright and ready, with sky-blue eyes and golden hair that hung in clustered ringlets all over his shapely head. He may have been 9 years old, he certainly was not any older, and he looked even younger than that. He was not a pretty boy, nor were his features homely, for the highly intelligent expression of his face overcame its plainness and rendered it attractive. Few persons passed Little Joe without turning to take a second glance at him, although this was caused as much by his sprightly tongue, perhaps, as by anything else. For Joe was witty, astonishingly quick at repartee, and decidedly loquacious. Unlike most of his companions, though, he was never known to use profane language. Such was Little Joe. One pleasant evening in early May I happened to be standing in front of the post office, where I had stopped for a moment to exchange a few words with a friend, when suddenly a firm hand fell upon my shoulder and held me as with a grip of steel. I turned my head quickly, expecting to behold the smiling face of some familiar friend, but to my surprise the man who had thus unceremoniously laid his hand upon me was a stranger. He was a tall, dark man, with black and piercing eyes, and wearing a heavy black beard. "Sir," I said, "please to remove your hand, or else quickly explain why you have taken this liberty." "Ha ha ha!" The stranger laughed in a loud and hearty voice, as he removed his hand from my shoulder and extended it in a most cordial manner to grasp my own. "Don't you know me, Captain?" I gave him my hand. His manner was so frank and open that I could not help it, but know him I did not. "I believe I fail to recognize you, sir," I said, or rather gasped, for he was shaking my hand so heartily that it almost caused me to wince with pain. Indeed, he was pumping my arm up and down so furiously that I really began to fear that something would break if he kept it up. "Don't know me!" he cried. "Why, I'm Paul Merton." It was he, indeed, a friend whom I had not seen during the past 10 years. Paul Merton was a man several years younger than I, whose acquaintance I had first made in Boston when he was quite a youth. He was a whole-souled fellow every inch, and I liked him thoroughly well. At the time when I first knew him, he was employed in a large banking house, where he was advanced until he held the position of first clerk, with prospect of rising still higher. Very suddenly, however, he resigned, told me he was going to South America, and went. His reason for this sudden movement I never knew, nor could I learn. It was a mystery to all his friends. I received several letters from him at first, but he ceased to write, and for 5 or 6 years previously to this sudden meeting I had not heard from him at all. No wonder, then, that I failed to recognize him. My hand and arm instantly found their action, and in the manner of handshaking I tried to return as good as he gave. I introduced my other friend, but he soon left us, and then I made a useless attempt to ask Paul 1,000 questions about himself in a single breath. Of course I failed. In the first place, because of the impossibility of asking more than one question at a time, and secondly, because I was interrupted by no less, no greater would sound better, a personage than Little Joe. "Here's your evening papers," he cried, as he pressed close to us and waved a paper over his head. "Here's your evening papers. All the latest news of the world, from Moscow to Chow Chow. If Queen Vic, King William, Old Biz, or Chalminazov is dead, here you'll get the latest accounts. Paper, sir?" We both glanced down at the little urchin, shaking our heads in the negative, But Paul, the moment his eyes fell upon the lad's face, bade him hold on and bought a paper, for which he handed a $1 bill in payment. "Say, this the largest you've got?" the boy quickly cried. "Ain't you got a 20 or a 50 that you want changed? Do you take me to be the sub-treasury? Do you think I'm as rich as George Gould?" Paul laughed. "Never mind the change, my little man," he said. "Keep it for yourself. What is your name?" "Thank ye, sir," said the boy, and he added, "My name? Well, most everybody calls me Lil Joe, but my real and lawful and only true and proper cognomen is Joseph Warrington. That's the name I took with me to Sunday school, anyhow." "Then you go to Sunday school, do you?" "Yes, sir-ree, every Sunday." "Who sends you there?" "My mother, sir." And as the words fell from his lips, I could see the light of love in his clear blue eyes. As for Paul, he seemed to me to be very much interested in the boy. "Have you no father?" he asked. "No," was the reply. "He's dead. I never saw him, sir." "Where do you live?" "At No. Hester Street, sir. We are very poor, and have only one room." "Is not this a hard life for you?" Paul next asked. "Well, it ain't a bed of roses by any means," the boy answered, dropping back into his free and easy street patois, which he had discarded for a moment, proving that his natural language was not that of the genuine street Arab. "Why," he added, "do you want to gauge me for a private secretary or anything like that? If so, I'm open to an offer. Examine the goods before you buy. I'm the real stuff and warranted not to fade." Paul laughed again. It was indeed curious to hear such talk from so small a boy. "No," Paul said, "but I do feel an interest in you. Does your mother have work, too?" "Yes, sir, when she is well, but she is now sick. I'm obliged to you for this money, sir, for now I can buy her some fruit." "You want to buy some fruit for her, eh?" "Yes, sir, I must hurry up and sell my papers, and then get the fruit and cut for home. Good night, sir." "Hold on," said Paul. "Here is another $1. You'll find fruit rather high, I fear, so take this, too." "I make it a point never to refuse the legal tender," said the boy as he accepted the bill. "Thank ye, sir. Now I'm off." And he darted away with his cry of, "Evening papers! Evening papers! Paper, sir?" while Paul and I turned our steps toward uptown. As we walked along, I noticed that my companion was thinking deeply about something, for he answered my questions half absent-mindedly. Presently he said, "Captain, I cannot get that little newsboy out of my mind. What do you know about him?" "No more than you do," I answered. "I think he is an honest, truthful little chap." "Will you go back with me and find him again?" Paul suddenly asked as he stopped short. "That boy reminds me of someone I have known, though I am unable to say whom, and I must know more about him. I must see his face again." I agreed, and we walked leisurely back to the corner. When we arrived, there was found a great number of people collected, but not having enough interest in the crowd to inquire the cause, we looked around for the boy. He was not to be seen. Thinking then that he must be somewhere in the crowd, we pressed forward to see if we could catch a glimpse of his diminutive form. From the conversation of those around us, we learned that someone had been knocked down by a horse, and then we, like the others, felt interested and worked our way toward the point where 2 policemen were standing. "Who is it?" someone in the crowd presently asked in a loud voice. "It is little Joe, the newsboy," one of the policemen replied. "Can you tell us where he lives?" "I can tell you that," cried Paul, as by a desperate effort he elbowed his way to the front, I following him. "He lives at No. Hester Street. Is he badly hurt?" "No, not very, I guess. There is an ugly scratch on his head, and he is unconscious, but no bones are broken." "Have you sent for an ambulance?" "Yes." There on the pavement lay poor little Joe, his face white as death and his golden hair dyed red with blood, while on his arm hung a small basket of fruit. Poor little lad! I can see him now, and Paul too, as he knelt beside him, gently examining his hurt. While Paul was kneeling beside him, the boy opened his eyes, and seeing the kindly face bending over him, he said, "Please, sir, take me home." Paul turned to the policeman. "If you will call a cab," he said, "I will take the boy home and see that he is cared for." "But the ambulance is here now," was the answer. "Never mind, let it return. The boy is not badly hurt, and I will care for him. Captain, will you call a cab?" The last to me. I soon found one, and then with the help of the policeman, the little newsboy was lifted up and carried to it, and Paul and I set out with him for his home. On arriving at the address little Joe had given us, we inquired for Mrs. Warrington, and found that such a person occupied a single room at the top of the house. It was one of the tall tenements, commonly called barracks. We told the cabman to wait, and taking the boy tenderly up, we lifted him out of the cab and carried him upstairs. An Irish woman conducted us to the right room, knocked and opened the door for us. The room was a small one, meagerly furnished, but perfectly neat and clean, and in a low chair sat a woman with a shawl closely drawn around her slender shoulders. She was not more than 28 years of age, but work, worry, and want had given her face a pinched expression that robbed it of its beauty, while her pale complexion spoke of recent illness. I entered first, Paul remaining for the moment out of sight with the boy. "Are you Mrs. Warrington?" I asked. "I am, sir," was the reply in a low, pleasing voice. "Your little boy has met with a slight accident and—" "Oh!" the woman cried as she sprang to her feet. "I hope it is nothing serious. Tell me quickly, sir." "Nothing serious, I assure you," I hastened to say, and at the same moment Paul entered with the boy in his arms. The mother sprang toward him instantly, and taking the boy into his own arms, she covered his childish face with kisses. "Oh, my darling," she cried as she laid him on the bed. "Speak to Mamma. You are not badly hurt, are you?" "No, I guess not," the boy answered faintly, with a smile upon his lips. I glanced at Paul as he moved toward the bed, and I noticed that his face was as pale as death. His eyes were fastened on the gentle-faced woman as she leaned over her boy, and I could see that he was greatly agitated. Presently he touched her arm, and in a hoarse voice said, Luella Ralston, is it you?" The woman uttered a cry and drew back, her face expressive of mingled surprise and alarm. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Do you not know me, Luella? Me, Paul?" A glad look came into the woman's eyes for an instant, and a flush to her cheeks, and she put her hand out toward him. But the next moment her face paled again, and with a low moan she sank down upon a chair. Leave me, she sobbed. "Oh, Paul, leave me." I was thunderstruck. Was I awake or dreaming? I certainly believed the latter. My friend dropped upon his knees beside the woman's chair, clasped her hand in his, and for several minutes they conversed in low and earnest tones. Presently Paul rose, pressed a kiss upon her brow, and then turned to me and bade me congratulate him on the happiest moment of his life, and he introduced the woman to me as Mrs. Ralston. I was surprised to see the change that had come over her so suddenly. Her cheeks were all aglow, and her eyes shone with the light of love and joy. "But my boy!" she suddenly cried. "We are forgetting him!" And she sprang to the bed where little Joe lay. "Guess I'm coming around all right, Mamma," the little fellow's cheery voice cried out as he sat up. "What is all this circus about, though?" he asked. "Who's that man?" indicating Paul. "He is Mr. Merton, Joe. A friend. An old friend of mine, Joe." Seeing that Joe was out of danger and needed no medical attendance, Paul turned to me, saying, "Captain, I must right here and now read a page of my life's history to you and explain that which is now a mystery, namely, my sudden departure from Boston 10 years ago, my reticence as to my reason for so doing, and now this strange scene you have witnessed tonight. 10 years ago, as you know, I held a good position in the banking house of Wallman and Company. My salary was not a large one, but it was sufficient to keep me in easy circumstances, and I was happy. When I so suddenly resigned my position and sailed for South America, though, I was fleeing my country like a criminal from justice." "Impossible!" I cried. I could not believe it. "It is the truth," Paul answered. "I was an innocent man, but I was powerless to defend myself. To flee was my only course." "Of what were you accused?" I asked. "Of embezzlement," was the reply. "Listen. Perhaps you knew, if not, I will tell you, that Mr. Wallman had a daughter. She was a beautiful girl, and as good, true, and womanly as she was pretty. She was in the habit of coming down to the banking house quite frequently, and it naturally followed that I became acquainted with her and she with me. Well, to make my story short, it was soon the same old story. I learned to love her, the daughter of a man said to be worth $1 million. I, a poor clerk who had nothing in the world to depend on save my salary. Somehow Mr. Wallman learned my secrets, and when he broached the subject to me, I did not deny the fact. His daughter loved me and was content to wait until my prospects were better, when she promised to become mine. What cared I for an angry father? Simply nothing. But I reckoned without my host. Mr. Wallman was terribly enraged and forbade my ever seeing his daughter again. He had far better prospects in view for her, he said. As to the daughter, she never came to the office after that, although I met her elsewhere now and then by appointment. This her father soon found out too, and then he formed a plan to ruin my reputation and make his daughter's love for me turn to contempt. Money began to disappear from the banking house in a very mysterious manner, and at last a detective was engaged to ascertain who was the thief. One afternoon, as I was about leaving the office, Mr. Wallman called me into his private room, and as I entered the door, the detective I have mentioned laid his hand upon my arm and arrested me. In my pocket was found a roll of bills amounting to $200 or more, nearly all of which bore a private mark which the detective had placed on the bills to trace them by. I was speechless, I, an innocent man, to have such a charge made against me. But good heavens, how could I explain my having the money in my pockets? I could not explain it. I had no idea it was there. I saw through the game at once, but what could I do? Mr. Wallman sympathized with me, read me a severe lecture, and was kind enough to say that if I would leave the country at once he would not make any charge against me, but would keep my disgrace a secret. What could I do? Nothing but go. I handed in my resignation at once and took passage for South America. No one could imagine why. I heard from Boston occasionally from different friends, all of whom wondered at my sudden move. None knew my secret save Mr. Wallman, his daughter, and the detective. I learned of the daughter's marriage, of Mr. Wallman's failure in business, of his death soon afterward, of his daughter's sudden disappearance from the city, and then nothing more for years. I went into business in South America, made money rapidly, and saved it, but I had no desire to return home, the only woman I ever loved being the wife of another. I had nothing to call me back, almost nothing to live for. What is it that now brings me back, then, you would ask? I will tell you. 3 months ago I received a letter from the detective who helped Mr. Wallman to carry out his plot against me, and in it a full confession of his part in the scheme. Poor fellow! He was about dying, and was settling up his worldly accounts. He also informed me that Mr. Wallman's daughter is a widow, and the hope of finding her is what brought me home. I have been to Boston, where I learned that she has not been seen in that city for years. Where she is, no one could tell me. I came here to New York yesterday, hoping to find a clue to her whereabouts by calling on her husband's relatives, whose address I obtained, but they knew nothing about her. Last night I found you by chance, Captain, and then this little newsboy came upon us. The moment I saw his face, it reminded me of someone I had seen. Now I can tell you of whom it was. Captain, this lady is Mr. Wallman's daughter, now Mrs. Ralston. Here the lady spoke, her hand resting peacefully in Paul's. Yes, I am she said. My husband died about 3 months after our marriage, and my father a short time later. I found then that I was homeless and without money. Nothing of my father's fortune was left. I found that those whom I thought to be my friends all deserted me in my hour of need, and I came to New York. Here, for several years, I did well at sewing. But my health broke down at last, and but for my little boy, I dare not think what would have become of me. As to the name Warrington, I assumed it to hide myself from all who had known me in my happier days. And but for little Joe, said Paul, I would never have found you. Heaven bless him. It was a joyous reunion. I went out, saying that I would return in an hour. At the end of that time I was back again, and with me my wife, and when we returned home, Mrs. Ralston, her boy, and Paul were with us. The story is told. Mrs. Ralston remained with us for several weeks, and then she became Mrs. Paul Merton. I never saw Paul looking happier than on that occasion, and often his eyes rested fondly upon him to whom he owed it all. Little Joe, the newsboy. End of section 19, read by Elsie Selwyn.